Please be seated. It is natural for us as human beings to have trouble and find it difficult to talk about God. So in our humanity, we refer to God usually by metaphor, by comparing God to something that we're familiar with. Sometimes the comparisons in metaphor are comfortable and familiar, like her eyes were as blue as the sky, or her eyes were as blue as the sea. Other times, though, comparisons in metaphor can be jarring, uncomfortable. Imagine this, her eyes were as blue as a bruise. It's different, isn't it? Her eyes were as blue as ink splattered on a white piece of paper. We're saying something different, aren't we? And when the comparisons like this happen, I think we are invited into something. We're invited to look at things differently. We're invited to take a step maybe over that comfortable threshold into a period of uncomfortableness and decipher and pull apart and see what's going on there. And I think that's what what the gospel writer of Matthew did throughout the whole gospel when talking about Jesus, because in Matthew's gospel, he talks about sinners as being sheep, as the word of God being like seed scattered on the ground, like the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding feast, like the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a vineyard. The kingdom of heaven is like this and this and this and this. And in this passage that we heard from Matthew this morning, Jesus launches into a volley of these comparisons, doesn't he? Kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It is like yeast. It is like buried treasure. It is like a great pearl. It is like a fishing net thrown out into the sea. The images come quickly, one right after another, with no time to think, no time to question, no time to wonder. It is not Jesus' normal way to be in such a rush. He is usually a better storyteller, if you will. And so maybe that's the first clue that maybe there's something here. These 5 flashes of the kingdom come to us so quickly that there is no time to settle down. Jesus zings them at us, zings them at us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like snapshots, like the scenery we see through the window of a fast-moving train. The kingdom of heaven is like this, and this, and this. It's like he doesn't want us to think too much about it. Like he doesn't want us to get stuck, but he wants us to be dazzled. Dazzled by the number and the variety of the things the kingdom of heaven is like. It is like this, it is like this, it is like this, it's like this. Now, the first 2 we're familiar with, and so they might be easy to think about. And that is the kingdom of heaven is like the mustard seed and like yeast. By themselves, nothing much impressive at all. But yet, if we sow the seed, if we mix the yeast into the dough, like I was telling the children, you will have abundance. You will have a tree that grows 15 feet high and provides perches for all the birds of the air and provides shade for the respite of tired people. And the yeast will burst forth and rise the dough so that there's enough bread for a family for a month. So if that is what the kingdom of heaven is like, it is astounding, if you will, potent. It is more than meets the eye. And as we move on to the other 3, the next 2 are a little bit more difficult. We have the man who is digging in a field and finds a great treasure, and he covers it up, and he goes back and sells everything that he has so that he can purchase this field so he can have the treasure. And so, one way to look at it might be as a poor man who has been made rich through luck if you will, if you give me that permission. And then we have the merchant, someone of means already who finds this pearl of great price, doesn't have enough money to afford it at the time, goes out, goes home, sells everything that he has to buy this one pearl. So if that is what the kingdom of heaven is like, wow. Somebody who's willing to go out and buy and sell everything they own because they see this value in this one thing. If that's what the kingdom of heaven is like, wow, thanks be to God. And then we have the last one, where the fish, the net thrown into the sea to catch the fish. And when the net is pulled up, it is full of good fish and of bad fish. And it is separated on the shore. But if the kingdom of heaven is like that, it is not something that we find, but it is something that finds us and hauls us in and pulls us into the light. It is a lot to digest, I must admit, every time I read this passage. But the striking thing to me about this week for me, was the fact that in all those stories, all those little one-liner parables, it is about the essential hiddenness of the message of Jesus. The mustard seed hidden in the ground, the yeast hidden in the dough, the treasure hidden in the field, the pearl hidden amongst a bunch of other pearls, and the fishing net hidden in the depths of the sea. It is something that is not readily apparent to the eye, but something that must be searched for, something that must be understood because it is just below the surface of things. There is a story of a wise woman who was in the mountains and she liked to walk in the stream. And she saw something in the stream and she reached down and picked it up. And it was this precious, precious stone, something that she knew could make her secure for a lifetime. And she loved the mountains and continued to stay in the mountains. And the next day, after she had prepared breakfast, a traveler came by and he was hungry. And so she reached into her little bag to pull out some bread. And the gentleman traveler saw the precious stone. And he asked her if he could have it. And the woman gladly gave it to him. And he left with just joyfulness in his heart because he knew that the good fortune that he had been given and the fact that he was now going to be secure for the rest of his life. But after a few days, he decided he needed to return to the woman. And he tells her, I've been thinking. I know how valuable this stone is, but I want to give it back to you in the hope that you can give me something even more precious. Give me what is deep within you, hidden from me, that allowed you and enabled you to give me that stone. Pretty powerful. That's what Jesus is asking to do, to just dig below the surface of all the things that are heaven, all those things that are like heaven. So where do we begin if we don't have a treasure map, if you will? Where do we start looking for the hidden kingdom of heaven? Yes, we might feel like we need to go to monasteries on holy mountains, or we might need to go to the Vatican or to the holy city of Jerusalem, or to the numerous cathedrals in the world. But I don't think we have to go that far. Because I think maybe what God has done here is the oldest trick in the book, if you will. He's guided us to the place where we're at. To the place where we put our X. Right now, my X is right here with all of you. Tomorrow, it'll be down there in my office, so that I can find the kingdom of heaven wherever I'm at. I think that's what Jesus is talking about here. I think that's what God is talking about here. That we are to bloom where we are planted. That we are to make our X, and we are to find heaven wherever we are at. Because it is here. It is around us. And Jesus knew it all along, didn't he? I mean, why else did he talk in terms of farmers and fields and women baking bread and merchants buying and selling things and fishermen selling fish, unless he meant to somehow tell us that the kingdom of heaven has to do with the things that we find ourselves in the humdrum, ho-hum, ordinary but not ordinary things in our lives. Those extraordinary places where we find the ordinary, and those ordinary places where we find the extraordinary in our neighbors, in the fact that that flower bulb in the dark basement sprouts forth a sprout, and who among us as parents do not have etched in our mind the smile of our child when we wake them up in the morning and they see that it is us. Or the first rainstorm after a long drought. Those are elements, images of the kingdom of heaven amongst us. And that's what Jesus is telling us this morning. That we just need to put an X down. Mark the spot here, right now. And find heaven in all the ordinary people and ordinary places and ordinary things where we live our lives.